we only have a class when one of the weekly Torah readings is on tap on Shabbat. And the next 2 weeks, of course, it's going to be Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. So this is, so come back in 3 weeks if you're, haven't forgotten me by then.
We will miss you.
Well, no, you won't, because you'll be watching me in shul. So here's a verse, and I think I kind of indicated a few weeks ago that I was going to talk about this. So among the many poetic verses in Moses' song in Parshat Ha'Azinu, okay, he talks about Yeshurun, okay, another name for the Jewish people. I mean, we're not the only congregation in the world called Beth Yeshurun, but it's relatively uncommon. And maybe this reason, maybe this verse is the reason for that. So he says, so Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and gross and coarse. He forsook the God who made him and spurned the rock of his support. Right? So what's happening here? What is Moses telling the people? Thoughts, comments?
Naughty people.
Naughty people, right? Yeah, why?
Too strong.
I'm sorry?
Too strong, like the calf in the next one.
Well, we'll in other words, that people become strong, they become wealthy, they become comfortable. And what does that lead to?
They're headstrong.
They become headstrong, and they become less loyal to God and less loyal to the mitzvot. All right? So the first question is there necessarily a negative correlation between someone becoming wealthy and a lack of religious loyalty? Can only poor people be religiously devout?
But we depend on those rich people to make donations to restore Beth Yeshurun when it gets flooded.
Oh, poo. So, we've all seen people of limited means who are, religiously very involved and very sincere, and their devotion tends to speak for itself. Maybe it's true that when you get wealthy, you tend to forget about religion, right? Now, there is a contrary viewpoint, right? Some suggest that only people who are affluent really have the time and the opportunity to devote themselves to religion. Poor people have to work 2 jobs. They're basically spending all their efforts on survival. And so how do they have time to cultivate a spiritual life? Who's got time for that if you're working 100 hours a week? Who's got the energy for it? But if you're wealthy, so you have the time, you have the leisure, and you can do it. Right?
Rabbi?
Yes. Yes, Del.
You have the time if you choose to put the time into it.
Well,
wasn't Maimonides virtually on the point of starvation, just getting by chopping wood?
No, you're thinking of Hillel.
Okay, Hillel.
Yes. So it is, it's true that you can point to people on both sides of the spectrum there were rabbis who were very wealthy, and there were rabbis who were just barely getting by, if that, right? The question is, in which case do the exceptions prove the rule? Right? So maybe you're right, and if you make the effort, you'll do it. Right? But there are forces on both sides that can work against that. Right? If you're wealthy, so you can afford to do a lot of fun things. And some of those fun things will tend to draw you away from the life of the Spirit. And on the other side, if you're working 100 hours a week, how much energy do you have? Yeah, maybe you'll make a little bit of time for it, but you're sure expending a whole lot of energy just making a living. So I'm not taking a position on either side of this. I'm just saying that it's a fair question.
Well, maybe there's no rule because there's things on both sides.
That's also possible. Right? So Moses seems to be saying wealth breeds complacency. Right? And so maybe we have to work harder to make Judaism a more compelling force in the lives of the people who have more. Right? And the other side is, you have to worry about keeping the doors open to people of modest means in our Jewish institutions. Right? So we have to stretch ourselves a little bit to make communal Judaism, synagogue Judaism, more available to people of limited means. Right? Other thoughts or comments here?
The people with greater means are the ones who have to help the people with lesser means to be more observant.
Yes, well, that's true. Absolutely. Right? Barbara says in the chat, people who have comforts are less loyal to where they came from. Right? So maybe that's where Moses is at. It's always important never to forget from where you came, not a sin to be wealthy, but important to use your resources wisely.
I don't think he's talking about wealth. I think what he's saying is once you have the creature comforts, don't forget God who helped you get those creature comforts. You prayed to God when we left Egypt because you didn't have food, you didn't have water, you had a harsh life. As your lives have gotten easier, don't forget that you still need God, and don't forget his teachings. Don't forget to pray just because you don't need anything.
Right. And if I were giving the sermon, that's probably how I would say it. I would be much gentler than Moses is here. But Moses really almost lashes out at the people, just saying you grew fat and gross and coarse. And maybe that's what led to you forsaking God. So again, I'm not taking the position. I agree with you, Barbara, but I would put it more nicely.
Okay.
But then again, nobody was trying to take Moses' job. Okay? When you're a rabbi in a congregation or in a position, you have to be a little bit more delicate. You don't say, you guys got all the money, you're fat, you're gross, you're coarse. Moses could afford to say those things.
I don't think it has to do with money. I think it has to do with you don't forsake God because your lives have become easier and that you now are going to have the land of milk and honey. You don't give up. Don't say, well, I've got it all. I don't need God anymore.
Now that we're in the land.
Right.
Yeah. Now that we're no longer wandering around in the desert. That's true. But that, most of the time, just because you went into the land and became a farmer on your own land, that doesn't mean that you grow fat and gross and coarse. Why does that happen? Because you got other people working for you. You're rolling in the dough.
But at this point, they were still in the desert.
Yes, but this seems to be a prediction on the part of Moses.
Well, he
So you're
noticed
saying,
the complacency of the people when they didn't have water, they didn't have food. They were looking for these things. They were willing to accept whatever was there, and if it meant praying to God, they did. The point is that Israel is getting in better shape. Don't just brush this whole thing off. Just keep true to God and to keep true to what he's asking you to do.
Okay, possibly. Um,
um,
I'm not sure I agree with you, Barbara, but you have a point.
there's a commentator, I forgot who it was, or I would give him credit, who said that the reason that the spies brought back a report against the Holy Land, caused them to have to wander in the desert for another 39 years, was because they didn't want to enter the land. They wanted to stay in the desert where they would be close to Hashem instead of going into the land where they might be tempted to follow other ways.
Right. Yeah, that's a nice, it's a nice drasha.
Seems very unlikely.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with it, but you could make a good sermon out of that. The pious Israelites wanting to be close to God in the wilderness.
Well,
Yeah.
Rabbi Yitzhak of Levi Yitzhak.
Oh, Levi
Like
Yitzchak
that.
of Berdichev. Yeah, that's the kind of thing he would say because Levi Yitzchak had this unbounded love for Jews, no matter where they were, who they were, or how righteous they were.
Or how
He
unrighteous
was
they were.
a great lover of Jewish people.
They're
So
smoking on
yeah,
Shabbat,
he would
and
be
he
the one
says,
to say this.
what?
So he would be the one to say that, even in the desert, everybody loved God so much, and he gives them much more credit than they really deserve.
He sees them smoking on Shabbat, and he says, maybe you didn't realize it was Shabbat. They say, oh yeah, we knew. Maybe you didn't know you're not supposed to smoke on Shabbat. No, we knew that too. You see, Hashem, they're honest.
That's right. That's one of those classic Levi Yitzchak stories. So, one of these years I'll give a talk with all with Levi Yitzchak stories.
That would be great.
Well,
I'm sure there's plenty that I haven't heard that we would all enjoy.
so the next text here comes from the Midrashic work Sifrei, and he talks about this verse and says, "This is like a man with a calf who fed it well so that it would be able to plow for him. When the calf grew, the man came to place the yoke upon it, and it used its strength to leap away and broke the yoke." Okay? So, this is one way of looking at it. Right? God supports Israel, feeds it well, and then at the first opportunity, you leap away and break the yoke. Right? That's the teaching from Sifrei. Right? So again, this is just one of those negative qualities that the Israelites have to watch out for.
Is Sifrei only
You
about
get well fed, and then you want to break free.
Is Sifrei only about Dvarim?
Yes, there's a book called Sifra, which is about Bamidbar, and Sifrei is Midrashim on Deuteronomy, on Devarim. Okay.
Thank you.
There are lots of other Midrashic books on all 5 of the books of the Torah. The main ones are, Midrash Rabbah and Tanchuma, and Sifra and Sifrei, just for those 2 books. Okay. Other comments or questions before we go forward?
Is there another place where we're called Yeshurun within the confines of the?
Yes, and we'll come to that. Okay. So next piece, this comes from the 14th century commentator Rabbeinu Bachya. He says the name Yeshurun is related to the word Ashurenu, which is used in Book of Numbers. What I behold will not be soon. Right? Beholding. Right? It has to do with seeing, because Israel is the people which saw the glory of the divine presence at Sinai, which is alluded to elsewhere in our chapter. Even though they will eventually sin, their having seen the glory will ultimately bring them back. In other words, this is the people who saw the glory. That is his understanding of what Yeshurun means. And because you saw the glory, it doesn't mean that you won't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that you won't commit sins. But if you saw the glory, you can't forget that completely, not forever. So you're always going to come back.
So the question is, have all of us, were we all there? Isn't that the tradition? In which
Well, yeah, sure. That there is a midrash that says that all the souls of Israel in all ages, including you and me, were present at Sinai.
So that means we've seen glory and we are going to.
Yeah, well, you could ask a question or two about that, right? Would anybody like to?
Does anybody here feel as if you've seen the glory and you remember being at Sinai, or you kind of like imagine remembering it?
I've only taken mushrooms one time, and I did not see that. And I can neither confirm or deny any other experience.
Uh-huh.
I hope Dr. Tu's not on. Is he here?
Right. Thank you, Nick.
God bless you.
Yeah. So, some of us have a different association with seeing the glory. Right?
Oh yeah, what do you mean? A different association?
Well, that's what Nick was talking about. The artificially induced celestial experience.
Well, they fasted and put their head between their knees. That's pretty artificial.
That is the sort of thing that could induce a paranormal experience. Right? That's a very standard operating procedure among the Jewish mystics and non-Jewish ones too. Yes, Del? You'll have to unmute yourself.
No, nothing. I just had to scratch my head.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm still learning how to read the signals over here. Okay. Other comments on this teaching of Rabbeinu Bachya? Do you believe that if you saw the glory at Sinai, you would, that would always bring you back?
Aren't there a lot of Jews that have gone away and never come back and claim not even to be Jews anymore?
Oh, yes.
Well,
Maybe their souls missed the day.
Maybe they're going to come back in another incarnation.
Yeah, well, that would be the, that would be the Kabbalah influence. At least, Lurianic Kabbalah would tell you that if you don't follow through on that in this life, you'll have to come do it again. And your soul will have to figure out how to make up for what it missed. It might be a challenge. So
I really
Wait till
prefer
the
not to
Mashiach-
do this twice.
yeah, I understand. I don't recommend it once.
That's funny.
Well, those who never are born, they're the fortunate ones.
Yeah. Well, I think, if you come to Jewish experiences often enough, you will eventually have an experience that, if not quite like Sinai, will definitely last.
I think it becomes embodied in you. And if you have the idea that souls will come back in other bodies,
Uh-huh.
then yes, we all were at Sinai because a soul that was at Sinai is embodied in us, maybe not entirely, but surely a piece of it, so that we all have a connection to everybody else and to our past. And eventually, if we would look to the future, our future will have a link as well to all of the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are always people who run away from their past, but very often they're not successful.
They really can't, because there's always something left. There's always a piece left, and that piece eventually will flare up.
Well, you hope so, but it may be very deeply suppressed. But again, I think those are the exceptions that prove the rule. I don't know how many of you read a couple of weeks ago about this woman who was teaching at George Washington University. And she was, she had basically passed herself off as a person of color, as having a history of a person of color. And it turned out that she, was Jewish, and she had basically cut herself off from her entire family, her entire past, until somebody threatened to out her. Somebody found that it got real suspicious, apparently, about her claims about her past, and they threatened to out her, and she basically went public with the truth.
What,
So-
what do you make
This
of
was
that?
someone who had suppressed their past, their connection to Judaism, and might never have come back to it or even admitted it had they not been forced to do so.
It was interesting that she chose to pass as black rather than to pass as white, which is what most Jews do.
Yeah, well,
One of
she
the things I
became-
found,
apparently in college, she became very interested in Black history, and I don't know how it got started, but she apparently it started when she was applying for scholarships, for graduate school.
Oh,
So,
I found that to be a really fascinating story. I'm glad you brought it up. One of the things that I found interesting was she actually had multiple identities in the past for a person of color. One of them was Puerto Rican. And,
uh-huh.
after she outed herself, all these people came forward and said, "Oh, well, I always thought she acted kind of strange. That wasn't a very good, her Bronx or Brooklyn, rather, Puerto Rican slang wasn't exactly correct." And the fact that she switched identities and that she always got away with it, to me, says more about our ability to fool ourselves about what we see as being accurate than it does about her pathology or whatever you want to call it, to need to reject her past and adopt this multiple
Mhm.
personalities. It was a
maybe
fascinating story.
Yeah.
We do have a want to take people at their word.
Exactly.
And normally that's a good thing. But apparently somebody got wise.
Did you read her mea culpa, her apology?
Yes.
It was
Yes.
very believable. She sounded truly contrite.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure she was sad and very guilty. I'm not sure it's contrition when somebody forces you into it.
No, I didn't mean that she was contrite. I think she was being as fake as she was all of one. But
Could be.
sounded like it sounded very in the heart, and truly it wasn't. More than likely, I don't think she really was contrite. I think she got caught, just like you said.
Yeah.
you're saying she did a good job of pretending to be contrite.
Right.
Okay. It seems to me that the one reason for doing something like that would be because Jews are being accused by people of color of being the whitest of the white. We're the ones whose fault it is that all the white people did all those bad things to all the people of color. We're the ones who are colonizing the Palestinians because we're really Europeans.
Well, I think that there are a certain percentage of people of color who make that kind of claim. I strongly sense that to be a minority and likely a small minority. They get a lot of attention because anti-Semitism gets attention. But most people of color don't necessarily buy into that narrative.
I just want to claim our non-white position. The Europeans never saw us as white. They always saw us as Asian, and that's one reason they didn't like us.
Well, I don't
I
know.
want to claim that. We're not white, we're Asian. The
Or
Holy Land is an Asian.
we are,
Pure nonsense. We're Europeans as much as anybody else.
or we're just outsiders, or we are heretics.
Well, why would we be as European as anyone else when some of us have no European blood, and those of us who have a little bit, so do some black people look white. If they have a little bit of
This
European
is
blood.
not an argument I care to have with you, Ann.
Who's talking?
Daniel.
Yeah, what'd you say, Daniel?
I said I don't want to argue about it.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go then to the next text. This is Ibn Ezra, who says Yeshurun may come from the word yashar. Now, in modern Hebrew, if you ask someone for directions, typically they'll point in the way you're going and just say yashar, yashar. Just go right down that way. You can't miss it, right? Yashar in the Bible means a straight person, right? Someone who is upright, someone who is dependable, someone who's righteous. And says Ibn Ezra, this is what the Jewish people are supposed to be. So at least that's what we're supposed to be, right? Right? And that's why the name Yeshurun gets put upon the Jewish people. Or, and let's go to the next one, from the Maharal. Yes, Yeshurun means straight, but maybe Israel is called Yeshurun because they are named after Jacob who became Israel. What's the deal with him? He followed the straight path of the middle way.
Did he really?
That's, one strand of the tradition, at least. Okay? That he kind of took the qualities of Abraham and Isaac and kind of integrated them in a way that chose the best, but also the middle path.
Oh, that's where Hesed is on one side and Din is on the other side. And
Well, you're giving a Kabbalistic path, and Judah Low would say that too, but I don't know if that's what he's saying here.
But he lied.
I beg your pardon?
He lied.
Jacob. Well, yeah, but that was when he was just a kid.
He already had a bunch of kids.
He was Yaakov. He was a heel. I'm sorry, Dale?
He had a bunch of kids when he lied to his twin brother.
Oh, well, yeah, but that was early on in life. Hopefully he didn't lie to his kids. Although he seems to have had some, less than stellar relationships with some of them. Reuben is a good case in point.
Oh. Is that the one that's left with his... Well,
with his concubine, yes. Yeah, so, that tells you something about the relationship between the son and the father, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what, but something. Okay?
Reuben was trying to establish his right as the firstborn.
Yes. But, if you're really the firstborn, you don't have to establish that right. Everybody knows it. What you're really trying to say, if you sleep with your father's concubine, what you're saying is, I'm now the head of the family.
Which means you're kicking him out before his time.
Which didn't quite work. So, other comments or questions up to here?
Perhaps Yeshurun is a composite of all of this, of song, of walking the straight path, of coming from the word from Jacob. And all of these are simply explanations of a word, but yet they all are encompassed in the word itself.
Well, I think that is true and not true, Barbara. It's true in the sense that we incorporate all these views into our tradition, and we learn lessons from each one of them, even if they are not the original reason. There probably was one original reason for the name Yeshurun being put upon the Jewish people. 100 years from now, if all the records are lost, and Beth Yeshurun still exists, I'm sure that there will be a healthy debate about why it was called Beth Yeshurun, right? or why the original congregation at Yeshurun was called that, right? But that doesn't change the fact that there probably was one original reason for it. So, even if only one of these answers was originally right, for our purposes, they're all useful. They all have something to say to us. They all have something to teach us. Or at least some of them do, and some of us will resonate to some answers more than others. Right? So, let's go back to the text. If you may find the explanation of the Maharal very appealing, right? Even if it's not the original reason. Right? After all, we don't see the word Yeshurun associated with Jacob. You see the name Israel associated with Jacob. So not sure that that's really true, but if it appeals to you, maybe it's because it has a ring of truth. That yes, this is a model for how Jews should live. Follow the straight path. Right? Follow the middle path. Next, from the Midrash Sutta on Song of Songs, this Yeshurun comes from the word Shira. Shira meaning song, because one of the formative experiences of the Jewish people was that they sang a song of praise to God after they were brought out of slavery in Egypt.
Right? That's a good one. It's one of the songs.
Yes. And it's our song, right? So Yeshurun, linguistically, I don't know how possible this is, but could be.
Probably isn't, but it sounds nice.
Yeah, sure. So they, again, the other thing about Shira is that is a song that acknowledges God, right? So it would be, after this act of gratitude to God, which is just the opposite of the connotation of the use of the word Yeshurun in our Parsha, right? Here, it says Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. Presumably, they were ungrateful, right? Okay. Other questions or comments here?
We haven't found anything else from the Pentateuch that uses the word Yeshurun. You said we're coming to one.
Yes, we will. At least I think we will. Yeah. Okay, so the next one comes from one of the Hasidic masters, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir of Ger. It says the name Yeshurun denotes a higher level for Israel, irrespective of which explanation you give for it, right? So why does it appear here in connection with the failings of the people? Right? Because that's what Moses is talking about. It suggests to us that even when the Jewish people are on a high level, when they deserve such praise, they become proud and overbearing, just as the verse suggests. Right? So you have to be very careful. It's when you are on a high level, or you've accomplished something and you deserve praise, that you have to really remember who you truly are and have this sense of humility. I always say, I'm very proud of how humble I've become. You know?
You always say that?
Yeah, well, frequently, So that's one of those little problems, just when I think I'm getting somewhere, I start to, with my humility, I start to feel proud about it. So, then you got to start all over again. Harumph. Okay. So that's when you really have to be careful. When you've achieved a certain something, it's like the old story of the rabbi and the cantor and the shamas who, one after another, they fall in front of the ark on Yontif. I'm nothing, I'm nothing. And after the shama says it, the rabbi turns to the cantor and says, "Oh, look who thinks he's a nothing." So, but the joke is not on the shamas. The joke is on the rabbi who, even though he says he's a nothing, he thinks he's really something. So we all have to be careful about that, right? Next, right? All of this comes from Samson Raphael Hirsch, right? And he says, the word Yeshurun comes from the root yashar, right? So he's convinced, Hirsch is generally, he will take the simplest explanation of things, right? And then he'll build upon it. Does not deviate from the high standards demanded by God. However, when the Israelites arrived in the land of Israel and enjoyed prosperity, they had a downfall. So it was like Moses was a prophet. He knew what was going to happen, right? He knew that they would become proud. He says, we also see Yeshurun mentioned twice in V'zot HaBracha, which will be read on Simchat Torah. Vayehi Yeshurun Melech. Any of you know the song with those words? Vayehi Yeshurun Melech, V'yosef Roshayam, Yachad, Yachad, Shiftei Yisrael. It's like a wedding song. He became king over Yeshurun when the numbers of the nation gathered, tribes of Israel in unity. Okay? And then, a few, down towards the end of the Parsha, Ein Ke'el Yeshurun. There is none like God, O Yeshurun. He rides across heaven to help you in his majesty through the upper heights.
Uh-huh.
And he says, Yeshurun is mentioned as well in Isaiah. It's great that Hirsch was able to pull all this out before you could do a computer search. Right? I guess he knew the Bible pretty well. Al tira avdi Yaakov, v'Yeshurun bachar tivo. Fear not my servant Jacob, and Yeshurun whom I have chosen. So it's a biblical parallelism. And here it's like A, B, B, A, and Yeshurun is like Jacob. Okay? Okay, I didn't know that one, but okay. And he says in the liturgy for Yom Kippur, we find this, for you are the forgiver of Israel and the pardoner of the tribes of Yeshurun in every generation. So look for that on Monday. Okay? And he says, we see from here that even those who are normally straight-laced still have the capacity to sin. Nobody's perfect, and nobody is above suspicion either, right? And the Israelites, in a time of prosperity, they didn't always succeed in doing the right thing. Okay? So I promised you I would get to that end, and there it is. Right? All the cases of Yeshurun. I don't know if it's all the cases.
Certainly several.
Yeah. And two right afterwards in V'zot HaBracha. Okay? So back to this question about the role of wealth, right? So here is a story that I found. The 18th century Eastern European scholar Rabbi Moshe Sofer, known as the Khatam Sofer, once spent time as a house guest of a member of the Rothschild family, who was not only a wealthy man, but he was also very pious, a very devoted Jew. And Rabbi Eliyahu Safran relates that as Sofer was preparing to leave, he was asked by his host, "Please tell me if there is any aspect of my household which is not run according to the Torah." And then, to demonstrate his determination to be, truly pious, he said, "If so, I will immediately rectify the situation." And Sofer says to him, "Everything I see in your household is contrary to Torah thought." This Rothschild practically collapses, but Rabbi Sofer smiles and explains the meaning of this comment based on this week's Torah reading. Moses predicts Yeshurun waxed fat and kicked, right? And one of the commentators, Rashba, explains the literary device refers to an animal who, after being fattened by his owner, now secure in his newfound energy and vitality, kicks the very owner who fed him. Similarly, Moses predicts that after the Jewish nation gets rich, gets prosperous, it will then reject God who blessed them with wealth, and they will turn to idolatry. And so the phrase has come to represent the danger of material wealth, the possibility that a person in prosperity might grow fat and use his wealth for self-gratification and fulfillment. He says, Moses predicts in the Torah that when the Jewish people become wealthy, they will rebel. Your home is clearly an exception to this prophecy. You have passed the test of plenty. God grant that all those who are prosperous follow your example. So the bottom line here, as the author of this piece says, is wealth and prosperity are, of course, a great blessing, but they also present a spiritual challenge. Does wealth make us focus on our own needs and our own desires, or do we put it to use for those around us as well?
What century did he say that to Rothschild?
He's 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century.
American Revolution.
Yeah, around that time. Comments or questions here? So the lesson that we can take from this, especially given that Yom Kippur is right around the corner, so, we should look at the prescription of the Unatana Tokev, regardless of how well off we are. Tshuva, self-improvement, all of our deeds. Tefillah, prayer, and tzedakah. In other words, not falling prey to the temptation described here for Yeshurun, but being more like the Rothschild in the story with the Khatam Sofer. Other comments or questions here? Yes, Ann.
There is a contingent of Jews who say Yom Kippur was created by Hashem in order to forgive us. He especially wants to forgive us, and we should spend the day, although we're fasting, rejoicing in the opportunity to be forgiven. That's what the day is for, and that's what's going to happen. And the more joyful we are on Yom Kippur, the better year we will have.
Okay.
So may that be so, and may everybody be forgiven and have a wonderful year.
Amen. Amen. Anyone else? Comments? All right. Wish everyone Gemar Chatima Tova. May you be sealed in the book of life for a good year. And may we all have a year of good health
And an easy fast
Amen.
by ourselves.
and a nice and a relatively easy fast. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Shabbat
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom. Gemar
Bless you,
Tov.
Rabbi.